In this fast-paced world where everything moves quickly and we're on to the next thing before we finish what we're doing, we might stop a moment and reflect on our thoughts and how they echo through time. They are not a one-and-done phenomenon. They linger and hang around in our subconscious, waiting to surface again. Hi, I'm Beth Bonness, host of the Thought Echoes podcast. Join me for an exploratory conversation with Elina Teboul, a conscious leadership expert and author of the new book, Feminine Intelligence. Listen as Elina shares her mission to redefine the traditional notions of leadership and business, shifting the purpose from merely making profit to actually serving the greater good, and how conscious leadership requires a radical self-awareness and understanding the ripple effects we feel in all aspects of our lives.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. My name is Elina Teboul, and I am the author of Feminine Intelligence: How Visionary Leaders Can Reshape a Business for Good. And this book was really inspired by my executive coaching practice. So I noticed something that I felt needed to be named. While I was often talking to clients about emotional intelligence and confidence and authenticity, the kind of topics that come up in leadership coaching very often, what I noticed mostly is that people were trying to fit themselves into a mold that felt disconnected from their authentic nature. And that impacted their confidence, their performance, their impact, their social impact, the good that they were able to do in the world. And I remembered from my previous life as a corporate lawyer in New York, where I went through that. And I felt like I was very much in my masculine. And what I realized was that the strengths, values, and principles associated with the archetypal feminine were often dismissed and undervalued in business settings and really beyond, I think, business settings as well. And so this idea of feminine intelligence came about. And I will say right away for our male listeners that this is not about gender, and we'll get into this much more deeply, I'm sure, but the feminine intelligence is for each and every person out there listening, and it's about the qualities, strengths, and values associated with the feminine that I'm advocating for bringing into the corporate world. And again, one very important thing to mention is that it is not about feminine instead of, or on top of, or versus the masculine. It is because our society has traditionally over-indexed on the masculine. And so I advocate for wholeness and balance for everyone, and by no means to say that the feminine is superior to the masculine in any way. It's really about integrating both.
That's certainly with my 30 years plus in corporate. Um, uh, the times you were rewarded, whether it was said or not, were for the more masculine, kind of get it done. And everything else that there was a perceived value in the quote unquote soft skills, the
Mm.
team building, the being able, you'd have somebody come up to you and say, how did you get that person to do that for you? They won't do that for me. And it's like, well, you listen to them and you try to figure out what they're looking to do and you look for a win-win for how you're able to get everybody to work together. But that was not something that got interviewed, when
Hmm.
you're talking to the engineers and the marketing people or whatnot, but there was a kind of an unspoken value put on it. But certainly when it came to ranking people, that it was the hard skills that were clearly got most of the attention. So I think it's delightful that you're looking at incorporating both of those in a language that's accessible for people to listen.
Yes, absolutely. And I completely agree that there was sometimes when the outcome of the feminine intelligence was seen, then it was like, oh, wow, that's actually quite useful. But then if you came and you said, I'd like to develop my skills in trusting my intuition, I'd like to spend more time in reflection and silence and to connect to a deeper purpose to make sure that I show up authentically, people would look like, what are you
Right.
talking about? So I think that it's really trying to even go a layer deeper so that you're listening, but you're also listening to yourself. You're listening to your inner truth and your inner voice, and you understand who you are and how you show up. And this is the feminine. This is the, if you know, listeners are probably familiar with the yin and yang. So the yang is about action and going forward and brightness, and the yin is the darkness, the self-reflection, the intuition. And you need both because very often in the corporate world where we take aggressive action because we are, need to get things done, and we don't take that step back to really reflect and integrate. And I think it's also about interconnection, especially in the US. Our culture is very individualistic, and we forget about the collective and the importance for our own sanity and happiness to be part of a collective, but also what it means for the world that we're leaving behind if we're not actually looking at it as a collective, but just thinking about individual progress.
When,
And
go ahead.
yeah, no, I just wanted to add to, because I always, people always talk to me about this gender point because the feminine people associate so much with the female form that men initially might think it's not for them. And I actually think it's very dangerous to say that the feminine is for women, because then some of these qualities can become almost obligations. That, oh, well, the feminine is for women. So you women go and you listen to everybody and you take care of their feelings and you trust your intuition, and we men are gonna go and create profit. So it's really important that this is not about gender because we don't want to create this kind of adverse consequence. And the second is, and this was really fascinating to me when I was interviewing people for the book, is that men in particular, once I understood explained the concept, were even more interested than women in developing this aspect of themselves because the patriarchy is equally difficult for men, just in a very different way. And I think we see what has been happening since November, and the rise of the masculine is certainly very prevalent for all of us. And I do think that there are men who are seeing this and thinking, oh, so this is masculinity, this is who I have to be. And for most men, that actually doesn't work. And they don't want to be that version of masculine, and that they want to be whole and that they want to be balanced and they want to integrate these aspects into their own lives, whether it be at work or at home. So really want to stress how important this gender distinction is.
When we talked about, or in the book, with having people understand being a conscious leader, and so the being whole, and you mentioned wanting to have more time to reflect. If you were to go back to HR or your, manager, and they're kind of like, what? No, you do that on the weekends. But as you have been working with clients in how they what's their relationship with their thoughts in terms of their trying to change what they've been conditioned to or unaware, I mean, consciously or unconsciously. And so trying to have them be more consciously aware of what this leadership in a more holistic way is.
Yeah.
How do those conversations go?
Yeah. Very important question as to how our thoughts direct our lives and the inner narratives that we construct that could be helpful and could be actually extremely unhelpful. So one of my favorite quotes is Carl Jung, who said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life." and you will call it fate.
Love that.
And this is what I see very often with my clients is that this lack of self-awareness of our thoughts creates narratives that derail our impact. So, for example, in my book, I've created something I call the true model of leadership. And these are the four areas in your life, regardless if this is in business or in your personal life, in your family, that I think are really important to master. And that T is for time, R is for relationships, U is for uncertainty, and E is for emotions. So we can have thoughts about each of these aspects that can derail our conscious leadership. So, for example, emotions. I have so many clients that I can think of, but I'll give one example of someone that I will call her Lucy for sake of the conversation. And Lucy was a tech CEO based in New York, and she came to me because she was having, like, her board actually wanted to fire her. She was a really high performer, completely in her masculine. She really was doing a good job, but her team was not inspired and her team did not love her. And she had problems with listening, she had problems with communication, she had problems expressing herself. And when we started our work together, we understood that there were so many underlying assumptions that resulted from various childhood experiences, which is very quite often, and that those very difficult childhood experiences created subconscious beliefs that manifested as emotions and thoughts that she wasn't conscious of and would show up in her leadership and derail her leadership on a regular basis. So this is how the relationship between your thoughts and being a conscious leader, I always like to tell people, don't believe everything you think. It's just most of it is actually nonsense. And if anyone take one day and try to write down your thoughts. Of course, we have, I mean, thousands of thoughts a day, so this is impossible. But try to write down some of the negative ones, that inner voice that sabotages you, that inner voice that when you walk into a networking event, I was listening to a podcast, and Trevor Noah, who you would imagine, very famous, likable person, was explaining how his subconscious belief is that when he walks into a party, that nobody wants to talk to him and that he just wants to find the corner. I was like, well, if Trevor Noah just wants to find the corner because nobody wants to talk to him, then what is it? What is there for the rest of us? And so it's recognizing that thought. I have a thought that nobody is going to want to speak to me at this very important networking event. But it's critical that I meet certain people because it's going to help me with my conscious leadership. So write that thought down and just ask you, where is this coming from? And probably from some earlier experiences in your life, but you can start to challenge those thoughts and realize that they're most likely untrue. But the first step is just recognizing your thoughts, putting them down, and understanding that thoughts do not mean that, thoughts are not reality.
When you talk about Trevor, there was a Saturday Night Live had their 50th anniversary, and there was a segment where I can't remember Yang, I think it was the Yang character, and he was talking about being really anxious and you've got all these famous people that are back for the 50th. Nobody's going to want to talk to me. I'm not even going to show up. And so then they started showing all that mental chatter with all the famous people too. And it's like, everybody feels anxious before going out there. And there's somehow that was reassuring, because it's like, as you said, if Trevor feels that way, then my feeling that way is not unusual. And so you can challenge Trevor. So it's easier to tell him not to worry about it because everybody's going to want to talk to him, but then to put the mirror kind of back on you, kind of saying the same thing. So that's interesting. And you used a woman as an example. Is there an example of a client that you had where the board or they came to you voluntarily in terms of asking for help, and how they worked through the thoughts they were having in their head, kind of as a place to start?
I think that this is a topic that comes up across genders and across generations. We always talk about that there's a generational gap right now as well in leadership. And I would say that the same kind of issues come up all the time. And what's interesting for me is I have a clinical psychology education as well. And so what I've noticed is that very often we have the people come with very similar issues. They want to inspire their team. It's about communication. It's about delegation very often. It's about, getting other people to go with them on the journey that they like to go on, strategy. And a lot of these problems, they actually tend to be superficial, and the underlying root causes tends to be those roots of each and every person where everybody has difficult experiences that they may have processed and may have not. And so again, it's making the subconscious conscious that is critical for absolutely everyone.
When we look at our Western culture and the individualistic culture that you talk about, certainly the feminine aspects of how we relate with how entangled we are with everybody is a big piece of it. And if it's always just about, forging ahead, there's a lot of other characteristics that help the community. But with your clients, do you have examples with the contrast between those who are US based versus more Eastern based in terms of what issues they bring up to the table? Are there concerns from an Eastern perspective that are totally different than we have that allow more of the feminine and the masculine kind of to play at the table at the same time?
So, I mean, I'll be honest, my practice is really, I live in London, so my practice is London based. I'm from the US, so very much also US based. So I haven't worked with Eastern tradition, with people from the Eastern tradition very much, but I think from the philosophical perspective, certainly there is more of a collectivist tendency and approach. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was really true. And when I think about entanglement and how our individual leadership affects all of those around us, in my book, I give an example of B Corps as organizations. So because really the idea is how do you, if you're a conscious leader, how do you then bring that into your organization and how can you create a movement and inspire others? Because that's the idea of interdependence within organizations, within our businesses. And so I interviewed Ben Anderson, and he was the former head of the board of B Corp in the US. And B Corps, for those who don't know, is for organizations that will fulfill certain requirements, whether it be how they treat nature, how they treat their employees, their suppliers. You have to get a certain score, and then you can get a B Corp certification. So some people might have seen this in the grocery store. There's a lot of food companies that now have a B Corp certification. So if you see that, you can know that you're supporting an organization that is trying to do more for the world. And it was quite interesting because when I interviewed Ben, it really stuck out with me. He called himself a movement, that he was trying to create a movement. So B Corps aren't just trying to create a certification, they're trying to inspire others by their actions to do the same. And one example I gave in my book is Danone, and Danone is the French yogurt company in the US. I think it's Danone. I never know how to pronounce it. But it was the first multinational organization to become a B Corp, which people actually thought would be impossible because the criteria to become a B Corp is very stringent. It's very difficult. And it was really intended for kind of small startups that are able to adapt and change things very rapidly. No one imagined that a huge multinational organization could do it. And at the time, they had a very prominent CEO called Emmanuel Faber. And Emmanuel Faber is kind of like the Steve Jobs of France. And you're written up in Vanity Fair, and people like he's a big figure in France. And he, understanding this idea of entanglement for conscious leadership, he said, well, if we can do this, then we can inspire others and bring others along on the journey. And so the organization went through a very timely and very expensive and very difficult process of becoming a B Corp so that they could inspire others to do the same. So for me, this idea of entanglement is all about interdependence and understanding that leadership is inherently relational, which is a very feminine concept to be relational. And I think what should be inspiring for all of the listeners out there is that you as one person can create the ripples of change. And sometimes we think, well, I'm not a big famous CEO, or like I don't have these resources. No, it all starts with just one person who wants to make a difference. And I really believe that every single person can be a catalyst for a shift within their organization, but even, start within your own family, and that could inspire real positive change.
Love that. With the clients that you've worked with, you mentioned, I mean, obviously they're there for, but the coaching goes to other aspects of their lives just because, we don't operate at work all the time. And have you found, or do you have any stories where the lessons, the kind of the process that you walk people through and the self-evaluation and, kind of checking in on their thoughts and is that true and all of that, where the ripple effect wasn't just at work, but there's stories about, once I became aware of this, whether to do it more or not to do it or how to change it, that there was a positive impact in other aspects of their life besides just at work?
Absolutely, probably every single client. So it's true that the kind of people I work with, it's executive coaching. So people come to me through their organizations, typically. But you are the same person at home that you are at work. Many of us try to be different people. We often fail, or we feel dissociated, disconnected, and like we're wearing a mask. And so to understand that the same things that will trigger you at work are going to impact your relationship at home. And I genuinely believe that for those of us who have romantic partners or spouses at home and children at home, the way that you interact with those relationships is going to impact every area of your life. I haven't met many leaders who, if they had trouble at home, didn't bring that into the workplace. And so all of these, the true model that I mentioned, your relationships, that does not just mean your work relationships, certainly. Managing your time so that you can find that balance. We often talk about this idea of work-life balance. I don't love that terminology, but it is important. And when you can master your time at work, you can also then create time to spend with your family at home, and also with mindfulness and stillness, which is a big part of feminine intelligence.
When I really was intrigued by the true model. So can you, with some of the time that we've got left, in terms of some practical tips that you'd have for people in terms of, they'll get your book and then they'll get it deeper, but to kind of tease them a little more in terms of when you start with somebody, is there kind of a place that you start with, or is it so different on each person that, it depends upon them in terms of what's your way to get in? So if you're generically trying to give advice to people as a place to start, where would that be in one of those true aspects?
Yes, so every coaching relationship always starts with a deep understanding of people's roots. So the value system that they, again, consciously or subconsciously hold as a result of their previous experiences, whether it be in childhood or other experiences. So there's always a deep dive for me into who is this person? And I really unpack what are the relationships. So very often in a work context, I will interview a lot of the people that the person works with. So this is the relationships piece, is to really understand from their bosses, from their peers, from the people who report to them, how does this person show up? And for some, it is leaning more into emotional mastery and to try to have some techniques around mindfulness and presence of how can you master those emotions when something is going wrong, communication. For others, it is, I mean, I think time is one that comes up a lot. I have not met a leader who does not say that they don't have enough time. And as one quick tip for any listeners, I would say that the most senior, most successful, most well compensated leaders have as little as possible on their calendar. So there's a Warren Buffett quote that I don't remember exactly, but he basically said that he spends the vast majority of his time reading and thinking. And the most successful leaders that I know block out chunks of time that they will never reschedule. So it will be 2 hours on a Monday and 3 hours on a Thursday. And that's thinking time. That's time in stillness and reflection and thinking without devices. And more junior people are terrified to do this. I mean, if I think about myself back in my corporate law days, this would have been unfathomable. Who would I bill this to? But it truly is extremely important. And there's so much research that when we are pressed for time, we make not only poor decisions and sometimes unethical decisions because we're simply not thinking, but we exacerbate our blind spots. And there are just so many things that we miss when we are in a constant rush. And unfortunately, especially in the US, there is a pride in busyness. And and I think that when people can let go of the kind of emotional identity around busyness, that it means that you're somehow important. It actually does not. It actually means the opposite, that the more important and successful you are, the more you say no to things that are not essential. And you sit down with yourself and you say, I'm going to cross these things off, say no more, and create that time for yourself.
When you say that, I'm following along, and yet there's an aspect of, I think, an expectation that uh, the feminine, from a relationship building and from making sure everybody's okay and kind of um, reading the room, that we were trained. I certainly was not trained to go take a break, and listening to my daughter talk to my granddaughter, 3 years old, and saying, Mama needs this is some private time. I'm going to go and I'm going to read a book. You're going to play with dad. And to have her use those words, not just disappear and kind of, my son-in-law takes over. That's such a gift I think she's giving, which that was not modeled to me. And I went to work, but I don't know that I ever said Mama needs, although I did. I did do some creative crafting things that I would do with them. That was kind of some of Mama time. For women who come in, and the tendency is to kind of over relationship, and that's not really a term, but you know what I mean. What would be your advice kind of to women in terms of how they manage their time? I see it easy for guys to block off time because their admins will make sure that they're not interrupted, but I don't think it comes as naturally to women. So that's kind of where I was going.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have a mentor, Tal Ben Hashar, who created the happiness class at Harvard University. So he was one of the first people to really bring positive psychology into the zeitgeist. And his research, I recall one lecture that he gave, and it really stood out to me because he said that happiness and taking time for yourself is not selfish, it's self-full. And this always stuck with me. It's self-full because you have to fill up your cup first in order to be able to give anything to anyone. And I'm sure that we have all witnessed an exhausted, overburdened person, regardless of gender, acting out in a way that is certainly not their best self, that is not their best self if it's at work for their colleagues, and it is certainly not conscious parenting. And to know that if you are not prioritizing your self-care, then you are jeopardizing your ability to be the kind of parent that your children respect, trust, and want to be around. And certainly, I'm now coaching very, very senior adults who, when they come up against difficult situations, will remember their experiences as children when there was not conscious parenting happening. And I think this is the really important perspective to take is that if I don't do this, I'm creating more harm. And that being a people pleaser is actually something that it sabotages me and labeling it as being a pleaser and understanding this as saboteur is something that can really help you start to learn to dismantle this saboteur.
A couple things came to mind. One is I remember, there was somebody who was exhausted because of the caregiver role they had with, somebody who was sick for a short period of time. So not like a spouse having Alzheimer's or Parkinson's where, this is the new norm, but it had some event that happened and they were exhausted. And I just remembered always, you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you do the kids. It's even before the kids. And that filling your cup up, it's kind of the same thing that if you're so depleted, you're not going to be, at some point, you're just going to, do something that's not in your best interest or somebody else's just because of the sheer exhaustion. And then to be able to recognize that and to be able to make a conscious choice, even though you may not be as successful at doing it every time, but just being consciously aware that, oh, I did that this time and look at the ripple effect, and oh, I didn't do that and look at the ripple effect. That being able to be, that self-aware has got to be beneficial. When you talked about having people write down their thoughts to just kind of the negative thoughts, to just kind of see where that mental chatter is going. Was that like an exercise you'd have people do for a period of time or just do it for a day so they got a flavor of that? How did people react to that?
Sometimes I think this exercise is most helpful for people who have, the imposter syndrome, the perfectionist. If you're listening to this, you know who you are. And if that's you, then there's a lot of negative self-talk that goes there, and there are certain patterns that you recognize. So, for example, I'll give the example of myself. I knew that I had a very restless personality. So, for me, any new project, any new person is great. So I can do project A, move on to project B, let's bring in C, D, and E. And it was always, just more, more, more. So the opposite of being conscious with how you master your time. And I understood that I had to listen to what are the emotions and what are the thoughts that are happening when I decide to take on a different project. So, what am I actually thinking? I'm thinking something like, oh, my time could be better spent doing XYZ. Oh, is this really adding value? Oh, is this something that I should be doing, or is there something else I should be doing? Right? Because if you're sitting at your computer and you're not even realizing the things you're saying to yourself. So catch yourself. What are those actual words that I'm hearing in my own head. And the emotions, what am I feeling? Well, I'm feeling anxiety because there could be 10 other things that I should be doing. Or I feel boredom because now I have to do this small, tedious thing when I could just go take on a big, brand new project. And identifying what are these feelings, what are these thoughts, and writing them down. Because we never really have this granular approach, and we know we're being restless, but we don't know what to do with it. And I think that just, again, getting quiet in stillness, listening to yourself and writing those things down will really help with those certain tendencies.
And so when you did that, because I'm sure a lot of people, myself included, can identify with that. So once you wrote that down and you kind of saw the trend, what was it that you did in terms of how you decided where you were going to invest your time?
Great question. So again, I think it's about once you recognize that's, for example, in this case, starting a new project is not because there's a great project I should start. It's because I'm sabotaging myself not to fully finish my initial project because in my childhood, there were certain things that I was trying to escape from mentally, emotionally, which led me to look for something else to do. And so these patterns became ingrained in my brain. And so what you have to do is you have to create new neural pathways and actually learn different behaviors. But the number one first step is recognizing that this is happening by being very conscious of the specific thoughts and emotions that are coming up. Because now when a new project comes up, I have to really think about, like, is this my saboteur that's interested? Or is this because this has real value? And unless I can prove to myself that this has real value, I'm not allowed to take it on. So thoughts and emotions lead to behaviors. And we can, once we understand our thoughts and emotions, then we can control our behaviors.
Okay, very good advice for everybody who's listening. Segueing way off, one of the topics you had, and I'm curious about, is the psychedelics that you've, with the clients that you've worked with. And psychedelics is finding a new renaissance, everything from Michael Pollan and various other people going on journeys. And now I remember years ago where there was a friend of mine had cancer, and so there was another friend who knew somebody who would do it, but it was all underground, so you had to go up on a different social media platform, so it wouldn't, because it was still risky for practitioners to exercise and use it. And now that's kind of, it's kind of changing it. So it's more above board and kind of people are intrigued by it. So you made a statement about, if I remember this correctly, that you don't know one billionaire who has not dappled in it.
That was Tim Ferriss who made
That was
that
Tim Ferriss.
statement.
Okay.
But I wrote about it. And he's probably right.
Yeah. So tell me about your experience with your
Yeah, so
clients. I'm not saying that you're a journey that you're doing that, but you've certainly talked about that with your clients. And so how has that informed how they've become more of a conscious leader?
yes, so I'll sort of explain my journey and interest in this, and I will say I do not actually practice psychedelic therapy with clients. It's very important for listeners to understand that in the vast majority of jurisdictions, it is illegal. There are certain places that people can go, for example, Jamaica, the Netherlands. There are certain jurisdictions. So if for anybody who's interested, I really encourage people to go to those places because it is safe, it is insured, it is properly guided. I think I'm extremely passionate about psychedelics, but I also understand and there's many examples of it not going well. So the first important part of this conversation is that it should be legal, it should be safe, and it should be guided by a professional who will understand that there is a lot of preparation and integration. It's not a one-off experience. So that's kind of the first important thing to say. And I was really interested in this again, I brought up this point that a lot of clients would come to me with different corporate kind of project problems that they were addressing, and that actually a lot of them had the same underlying root cause problems. And that made me very curious as, like all of these things about our childhood and our parents and things that happen to us, and they get buried down. And traditional therapy does a really bad job. And actually, when you look at the statistics, I don't have a lot of hope in traditional therapy, I have to say, for some of those deeper topics. And when you look at the research studies in psychedelics, it is very clear to me that these therapies, when done properly, address these root causes 100 times better than what we're able to do now with antidepressants and things like that in traditional therapy. And so I decided that I was going to become trained as a psychedelic assisted therapist. Not that I would do it, but just to really understand what does it entail. So I went to the California Institute of Integral Studies, which is CIS. And this is a university that has held this program for about a decade. And it's a year-long academic program, which is very unusual in this space. So really taking a very research-based academic approach there and to understand what happens here. And I think that, so what I write about is for business leadership. And in that space, there's not a lot of research. There's a lot of research for mental health, specifically for things like eating disorders, certain traumas. But there's not enough research that directly links psychedelic experiences with conscious business leadership. But it's starting. And there is enough research to say that your creativity is affected tremendously. Your empathy is impacted positively tremendously, and your self-awareness as well, and your ability to deal with uncertainty, which is the you in my true model that all leaders now really need to have flexibility and agility and be comfortable with uncertainty. And the reason that psychedelics are able to do this is because of neuroplasticity. So if you think about your brain kind of like as a city, and you have all of these different highways, and we become we have the same thought patterns over and over and over again based on our actions. So this becomes stale. And what psychedelics do is they start to take some of the traffic lights off, they start to build new highways. So all of a sudden, I can take completely different routes. And I'm not stuck in those old triggers and those old ways of thinking about things, but I have my doors of perception are open, and I'm much more able to see other people's perspectives, imagine alternatives, and because I have access to completely different parts of my brain that I just didn't have before. So I think that for me, this is hopefully they become legalized so that it could be, safe, first of all, because now that these medicines are not legalized, there's a big underground community, and there's no way to check whether you're working with somebody who's been properly trained, who's taking this seriously. So unfortunately, the fact that these medicines are not legalized actually creates a lot of problems. And I hope that one day they will be legalized so that leaders can go on these intentional journeys and open up their sense of perception and awareness of what's possible. So in a lot of this, conscious leadership conversations, we say, you want to put love at the center of your business instead of profits. I mean, why would you do that? Well, John Mackey, who is the founder of Whole Foods, has recently come out with his book, and he is also the co-author of Conscious Capitalism, the book and the movement. And he writes in his book that it was his experiences with MDMA and being able to feel love, like really feel love, what inspired him to say, but I want my business to make employees and community members and suppliers to feel that. And he created not only an extremely profitable organization, but an organization that reimagined the rules of business and created a conscious movement. And that was inspired by his MDMA journey. So there are leaders who are now coming out and explaining that these two things are really connected. That with psychedelics, we also have a connection to nature. So there's proven research about nature connection specifically for psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. So leaders are coming out and saying, I want to protect the environment and I want to bring love to corporate culture because these medicines are breaking down the barriers that were created by our societal and cultural narratives that are frankly no longer helpful.
Yeah, I think we're just seeing the beginning of what psychedelics and can do in benefiting. I'm sure there'll be horror stories and, there are bad situations, but overall, hopefully there'll be, more success stories. So as it becomes legal, it becomes a viable option. There are some family members who the traditional treatment is not working for them, and there's research to show this other stuff could, but it's not legal or covered by insurance. And so, you just hope that that happens in a time that can actually help benefit them because the current stuff isn't working. So
Absolutely. And I'll say that spirituality is also something we don't often talk about in the business context. But I really do believe that the crisis of leadership is very connected to a crisis of spirituality. That as we continue to have a more secular society, we are no longer convening with the divine in the same way that maybe we used to. And it doesn't have to be about religion, but it has to be about our understanding of our true nature and a connection to something awe-inspiring and larger than ourselves. And when we have those kind of experiences, when we can step into this right brain consciousness, we want to make the world different than it is. And we shift into a more collective conscious mindset. And we are able to stand up for those beliefs with confidence and conviction in our workplaces. And so this is, I think, a gift that our culture really needs at this moment.
well, thank you for your contribution to the conversation. Do you have any parting words of advice for people who are trying to either recognize or honor the feminine intelligence that they have, or for others to be more open to it? Do you have any parting words of wisdom?
Since we've just wrapped up this conversation around psychedelics, I think that's really important that it's very difficult to think your way into feminine intelligence. And because this is specifically that intuitive, instinctive part of ourselves that is most often accessed through prayer, embodied psychosomatic experiences, dance, singing, the kind of if people say, well, you have your best ideas when you're in the shower. It's because you're not thinking about them. It's because, or the runner's high, and then you finish your workout, and all of a sudden, eureka, something clicks. Very often, since the Enlightenment era, we have prioritized this masculine approach, which again is all about the left brain, all about the goal setting and the logical, linear, rational way of thinking. And in order to step into that feminine right brain consciousness, it really is about making time for body experiences, for spiritual experiences, so that you can cultivate that inner knowing and inner listening, which you can then, of course, bring into the masculine to take action on it. But it really does start with finding a space for different kinds of activities that are not traditionally intellectual ones.
So if people want to find you, I'll post your where you can get your book and then your website. And so the book comes out
March 24th. It's available on pre-order now on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Waterstones, wherever you get your books.
Sounds wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. And not that I knew everything about feminine intelligence, but I certainly loved hearing all the aspects and how you are bringing it into corporate America and the ripple effect that it's having outside. So thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
taking the
much.
time.
Really, really a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear your comments. Please leave a review, subscribe, and share. It helps get the word out. Until next time.